Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, a Pittsburgh Steelers podcast made by fans like you, for fans like you. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. I am your host, Joe Kuzma, and I've got some Steelers news for you. Actually, a few new and noteworthy things going on this week in the Steelers sphere. Before I get to that, I just wanted to let all of my listeners know that if you like this show, and if you've been rating and reviewing it and sharing with your friends, of course, I've always been very thankful of that here on the broadcast. But I wanted to let you know that I've opened a new online store over at steelcityunderground.com. So if you're looking for some new black and gold gear to wear on your football Fridays, I have a number of novelty t-shirts that actually are my own original design. So guys and girls, and even for kids too, we've got all kind of sizes. It's all handled by Amazon. So if you're already an Amazon Prime member, you're going to get free Prime shipping with any of your orders. So head on over to steelcityunderground.com/shop, or you could click on the shop icon if you happen to be on the homepage and check out some of the cool stuff I have over there. Got a few neat things, like one is a slogan called "The Standard is the Standard," and for those of you who have had the privilege or have even seen just photos of the Pittsburgh Steelers locker room, it's almost an exact replica of the sign that you see as soon as you walk in, so that's really cool. And for those of you who do the landscaping, the yard, and the gardening outside and happen to like the garden gnomes, we have a black and gold garden gnome too that's on a t-shirt. So these are all original designs. I have about 10 of them up right now for sale and hope to have close to 24 before it's all said and done within the next month. So I appreciate everyone who listens, and if you want to give back a little bit and support the podcast and the website, head on over to that shop and make a purchase, and I truly appreciate that. But onward to the real reason why we're all listening, aside from my little sales pitch there, is we have some news. All right, we talked about Bruce Gradkowski in the last podcast, but something that actually didn't happen was Jarvis Jones did not have his fifth-year option renewed. It has been, well, I guess you would say declined. Inaction would be about the same. So they did not pick up, the Steelers that is, did not pick up the fifth-year option on linebacker Jarvis Jones. So what that means is, if you haven't heard one of the old podcasts in the archive, what the fifth-year option has, let me rewind here. So a few years ago in the NFL, they had a new collective bargaining agreement with the NFLPA, which is the NFL Players Association. And what happened there is you have some new rules as far as your union and your ownership, okay? And what they allowed is, it basically structured this so teams weren't just going to rookies and giving rookies all of the money up front, and veterans were languishing and not being able to be re-signed. So there's veteran minimums, and it also gave some incentive for teams to at least hold on to some of these veteran players maybe a little bit longer, and yada, yada, yada. But the big thing is if you were a first-round draft pick, and I believe Cameron Hayward is the first one who fell under this designation. So if you're a player who's drafted in the first round of the NFL draft, most of your rookies are going to get 3 to 4 year contracts. So with the 4-year contract being the maximum if you're not a first-round pick. So, of course, those could always be extended, and, of course, teams are going to be very mindful of how they spend their salary cap or their budget. So a lot of players are not going to get the big money until you're in to almost free agency that third or fourth year. What ends up happening is if you're a first-round draft pick, it's almost the equivalent of the fifth-year option is almost the equivalent of like a franchise tag, where the team can retain the rights to you, but you're going to make some more money. So it's fair on both sides in that a player such as David DeCastro, for example, is the most recent Steeler to have the fifth-year option exercised. It was exercised last year, and this year, 2016, will be his fifth year. Okay, so he's optioned, and I don't have it in front of me, but I want to say he's making like $7 or $8 million this season as opposed to, well, let's look and see here. Jarvis Jones is the topic today, so I do have some notes on Jarvis Jones. And Jarvis Jones under contract for 2016 for, it's reporting as a $1.59 million contract, so $1.6 million we'll call it, and some change. So $1.6 million this year for what the option had called for. If the Steelers would have exercised it, would have been $8.4 million in 2017. So if that just made your eyes pop, it made mine pop too. You jump from 1.6 million roughly to 8.4 million, or almost what's the actual math on that? I mean, we're not even at 2 million there, so we're almost at like 5 times the amount of money at least that Jarvis Jones would be making if the Steelers exercise that option. And you have to say to yourself, and I haven't been, what do you say? I haven't ragged on Jarvis Jones. I actually think he hasn't been terrible. And a lot of people want to say, well, he's only had 5 career sacks. Well, before he got hurt in his second year, his first year was really, really unfair to him. You see how that all turned out. The deal with, being a co-starter, Jason Worlds, and then Lamar Woodley. I mean, the Steelers linebacker situation, the outside linebackers, has been a mess for several years. And of course, it was when Jarvis Jones got hurt that prompted the Steelers to break the glass in case of emergency and prompt James Harrison to come out of retirement. So Jarvis Jones, he'd been hurt, and last year was really his real first full year. But if we see the way that Keith Butler has been handling the defense, he's been almost doing like hockey shifts. For those of you Pens fans that are out there and understand the different lines, we see the outside linebackers rotate, and we've seen different rotations too. And I want to say that last year that Jarvis Jones and Arthur Moats were kind of the starters, if you will, at the outside linebacker position, but that did rotate, but that was like the first line. And then you see maybe James Harrison and Bud Dupree as that kind of second line. And I don't know necessarily if that has to deal with if they're trying to guess run versus pass, and if they're trying to get a pass rush, maybe Dupree and Harrison better at pass rush versus coverage, or trying to just mask what they do. And we certainly saw Arthur Moats out there with Harrison and vice versa. So it mixes up some. And basically what I'm getting at with Jarvis Jones is that he could have a big year. He could be a disappointment. And the Steelers, instead of putting all their eggs in one basket and being smart shoppers, they're not going to be on the hook for $8.4 million as of now in May of 2016, and then have to have another bad deal just like they did with Lamar Woodley, where they were still paying him, and then Cortez Allen. And you're going to have bad deals sometimes, but I think they still kind of have a bad taste in their mouth right now when it comes to the players that they have been giving the contracts to versus the return on their investment. And I don't think anybody's going to disagree with that from a business standpoint. Remember, we're always trying to the Steel City Underground is a concept or a movement that gets you to think a little bit differently and outside the box. So Jarvis Jones having just 5 career sacks, he really didn't even have that many tackles last season either. So it's very disappointing, and it's difficult for me to prop him up. But we see a lot of times in this system and dealing with Pittsburgh Steelers linebackers that it takes several years for the light bulb to come on, and this could be the year. And if that were to happen, the Steelers could still just come to different terms with a contract extension. They could use a franchise tag. They could use a transition tag as they did with Jason World. So there's many options. Basically, there's a lot of football and a lot of things that are going to happen between now and when the 2017 league year starts 10, 11 months from now. So I don't want anybody to really jump the gun and think that the Steelers are already ready to move on from Jarvis Jones, because that may not be the case. And I could guarantee, too, some team, if it isn't the Steelers, And the Steelers say they're not going to sign Jones. And they're going to let him test free agency. Somebody's going to bite. Somebody's going to take a nibble on that bait. It happens with a lot of players. We saw it happen. They did the same thing with Kelvin Beachum, and I think they were still kind of playing around at what their options were. And then they end up signing Ryan Harris. And that pretty much and they re-signed Ramon Foster too. And that pretty much said to Kelvin Beachum and his agent and to everybody else, hey, we just don't have enough money left in the bank account to be able to pay for Kelvin Beachum. It's not to say that Kelvin Beachum is a bad player. Kelvin Beachum got himself a nice deal down in Jacksonville. So these type of things do happen. And you got to be thinking ahead too. I've already discussed when it came to the draft, the Steelers linebacker situation coming up. And Lawrence Timmons is going to be a free agent after this year, as of right now. Okay, something can change between now and when the season starts. As we know, the Steelers front office does not like to deal with contracts while they are in season. So when the regular season kicks off, it is very, very, very rare. I want to say the only person anything's ever happened as far as any type of contract extension, negotiation, or whatnot with the Steelers while they've actually are in playing during the regular season may have been Troy Polamalu several years ago. So that typically does not happen. And of course, Troy deserves that, being the special player that he was. So there's another free agent on the cusp too. Well, I'll get to him in a second, but our other linebackers, so James Harrison, likely his last year. And then there's also like a stopgap here. Sean Spence was replaced with the guy, Steven Johnson from the Tennessee Titans. He's under a 1-year type of prove-it deal. Vince Williams will also be a free agent at inside linebackers. So there's plenty of inside linebackers that are going up for contract. Do believe that Arthur Moats is still with the Steelers camp through 2017. So I believe he has 2 years left. And then, of course, we're going to be in this same situation before you know it, talking about this next year with Ryan Shazier. So plenty of things that are going to happen between now and then. One of those two is Le'Veon Bell. That's the guy I was saying I was going to talk about, because Le'Veon Bell will also be another player entering free agency, and he is not a first-round draft pick. So that is somebody the Steelers will not be able to exercise a fifth-year option on. So if it comes down between using a tag, and you get to use one franchise tag. We saw it with the Denver Broncos, Brock Osweiler or Von Miller, and they went with Von Miller, and Brock Osweiler signs elsewhere. I don't think there's going to be an argument from all of the Yinzers out there. I love saying this. We're on Twitter all the time. And I always say Yinzers are going to Yinz, because they're always complaining about something, whether it be the Steelers, the Pens, or the Pirates. It happens. And they're really Yinzing about the Pirates losing to the Cubs in that series, right? So if it comes down to it, are you going to want to tag Le'Veon Bell? Are you going to want to tag Lawrence Timmons? Or are you going to want to tag Jarvis Jones? Yeah. I think we know who the weakest link in that situation is. So stay tuned to that, but I'm still not convinced that Jarvis Jones is entirely a bust. I mean, you look at it, his numbers could improve, and I do think his numbers will improve as far as how much he gets paid if he does become a free agent. So the Steelers might just let that go. But with all of that said, we also know for sure that James Harrison is returning. And if I've mentioned that already, sorry to be a broken record, but it was on May 2nd that he made his official announcement that he would return for the 2016 season, fulfilling his 2-year contract that he signed a little over a year ago. So, James Harrison, right back in the fold, just turned 38 years old this week. That guy is a monster. Posted one of his videos off of Instagram. If you don't follow him, or you don't know where to look for it, you could head over to facebook.com/SteelCityUnderground. There's a link right off of our homepage on SteelCityUnderground.com, and you will see some amazing stuff that James Harrison is just like Superman that's out there. So, speaking of Twitter, I had some very cool interactions over the last week or so with some awesome Steelers players. Former player Merrill Hodge, I said he was my favorite 10th round draft pick of all time, and he ended up liking and commenting on that. So that was pretty cool. Just a little personal thing. One of my childhood idols growing up, Merrill Hodge. That's pretty awesome. Oh, Mike Mitchell too. I was going back and forth with Mike Mitchell today, and I was just, something came. You could only say so much in 144 characters on Twitter when you're sending a tweet. But I had to ask Mike Mitchell, and I didn't hear anything from D'Angelo Williams. I don't know that I will, but these guys live on Twitter more than I do when it comes to social media. And I just had to ask, like, Mike Tomlin pretty cool with that? And how is that versus, because both of these guys came over from the Carolina Panthers. So how cool is Coach Tomlin with that versus Ron Rivera, the head coach of the Carolina Panthers? And Mike Mitchell said they're two of his favorite coaches, and, you know, they treat them like men, obviously, with the respect and yada yada. So that was kind of cool. I digress. I kind of went off the reservation, but speaking of fifth-year options and a player in his fifth-year option this year, David DeCastro will be playing his fifth-year option that was exercised last year. And I mentioned that versus what happened with Jarvis Jones. But what's pretty interesting now is that David DeCastro sits on an island, a man by himself, being the only member of the 2012 Steelers draft class still on the roster, because a few days ago the Steelers made some cuts to get their roster trimmed down to 90, mandated by the NFL. All of the rosters had to do that. I have no idea how the Cleveland Browns, what they did. I don't pay attention to them too much, but they had 14 draft picks, and I just can't imagine all the space that they need to make on their roster for all those incoming players, because you're going to want to at least try them out and get them into rookie camps and training camp in the preseason, right? Well, the Steelers had to release 3 players. One was a kicker, Ty Long, and we already had Sweesham and Chris Boswell still there, so that was kind of expected. And then there was a running back. His name's escaping me right now. And then the Steelers finally cut ties with the man selected right after David DeCastro in 2012, second-round draft pick, a tackle from the Ohio State University, Mike Adams. Steelers finally parting ways with Adams. What an odd career for Mike Adams. He comes in, and if you recall, his draft value dropped heading into the 2012 draft. He had some drug issues right before then. Many were speculating whether teams would be willing to take a chance on him. Many speculated whether the Steelers would take a chance on them, and they did. And that kind of goes against the grain of what they usually do, right? And so Mike Adams comes in, and he starts something like 6 or 8 games in that first year. And Mike Adams was probably a better right tackle than a left tackle, I want to say. But unfortunately for Adams, he was drafted to be a left tackle. Now, he did play both, and he was a backup as a swing tackle, but the Steelers already invested in Marcus Gilbert a year or two earlier, also a second-round draft choice. And if you're not good at both, you're probably not going to be around very long. Now, that Adams is released, he's like maybe he's one of 3 guys that are out there that's a free agent, that's a left tackle in the NFL. So he'll probably find work. I can't imagine that somebody wouldn't give him a chance. But you see what happens is, after the first year, Mike Adams, and part of this oddball 2012 class, I just wrote an article on over at steelcityunderground.com, and I called him a cursed 2012 class. Because if you remember, David DeCastro gets hurt and doesn't even play for the whole start of that 2012 year. He ends up appearing, I think he plays in maybe 4 games. He starts 3 of them towards the end of the year, but he went on to that physically unable to perform, IR designation to return. It's like some big, long thing, and he basically sits out 9 games. It's the thing they did, Cowboys did with Tony Romo, if you're more familiar with that last year, where they could kind of put somebody else in his roster spot for a short period of time, and just, they don't have to waste a roster spot for that player. So DeCastro ends up going out of there. Mike Adams gets benched after the first 4 games of the 2013 season in year 2. And that's how, speaking of Kelvin Beachum, that's how Kelvin Beachum gets in there. Mike Adams loses his opportunity. Then he supposedly gets stabbed on the south side. And there's that whole incident, and he recovers from that. And then heading into last year, he just wasn't the same guy, and he had to have back surgery, and he was on injured reserve list the entire year. So it's not entirely surprising. But the thing is, a lot of people, they always want to talk about draft busts. And I can't necessarily say that a player that gets injured is a draft bust, because sometimes, your own health might be out of your control. So I don't like to call injured players a bust. If a guy's taken high and he just doesn't work out, or there are circumstances beyond their control, there are very few legitimate busts, I believe, in the NFL. I believe a lot of guys get their opportunities, and there's always circumstances beyond their control that, it just doesn't work out for them. So I don't know. I was really thinking maybe that this could have turned around with Mike Adams when Mike Munchak come in as the offensive line coach. And man, am I always scared of that too, is that maybe Mike Munchak might leave this team and get another gig. What a job he's been doing. And you see what happens. The Steelers draft Gerald Hawkins in the 4th round. They end up signing Ryan Harris, which allowed them to kind of cut ties with Kelvin Beachum. So they have they have 2 guys that could play as a swing tackle that are going to compete with last year's college free agent. He didn't come out of college, but street free agent Alejandro Villanueva. And we're going to see. Yeah, so that is kind of unfortunate with Mike Adams, and now we will see what Mike Munchak does with this offensive line this year. There's going to be a healthy competition for that left tackle spot. It's just unfortunate sometimes things don't work out the way that you expected. Remember, in 2012, Ben Roethlisberger was still running for his life and being used as a punching bag, and DeCastro and Adams were the guys that were to come in and do it, and DeCastro was slow out the gate. Ended up with the friendly fire thing where he accidentally injured Mike Pouncey. Oh, the wrong guy. I've got Tunsil on my brain. Marquise Pouncey, 2013, in that first game of the year. And then the Steelers were playing with a backup center, much like they did last year. And, I mean, just the difference in having Mike Munchak there as a coach is huge. So I'm really looking forward to that. I want to thank everyone for listening. We'll have some more Steelers news as it continues to trickle out. Until then, I don't want to be a broken record, but I will keep you up to date. I will inform you and release the podcasts and articles as they become available. One cool thing that is out over on SteelCityUnderground.com, they did issue all of the rookies at least their initial numbers that they're going to be wearing probably through training camp and part of the preseason. Some guys are going to change those numbers, of course, as the roster cuts come and more numbers become available, and maybe some veteran guys who have a number that they would prefer to wear are no longer on the team. So that's kind of cool. Go check that out when you have a chance. And of course, I plugged the shop earlier. If you're looking to wear something for your football Fridays in the office, at your workplace, head on over to steelcityunderground.com/shop for all kinds of cool fan gear. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for listening. I will catch up with you soon. Be good.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.